Well, still working on the top of the camera. I'll start putting the rewind stuff back on here, I think. So we had our chrome trim plate, and that had two chrome plated screws there, filling those holes that an accessory shoe would otherwise be fitted to. So we'll get them in place. And the rewind shaft and bush can go in place. I'll lubricate that with some synthetic grease. Just push the bush shaft back up. I'll just lift that tab with the tip of my tweezers to make it easier to push the shaft back through. That's fine. That goes on the top of the body here. And we have two countersunk head screws. Tighten them up. And the rewind knob can go on. That just turns on conventionally. Put something through the fork to stop it turning. Tighten it with your fingers. Job done. So the shutter advanced components. Now we've got a fair few little bits and pieces to go on here. Alright, start with this film advanced stuff here. Make sure I get these pieces on in the right order. That gear goes on. That little ratchet wheel. Take a close look at the direction of the teeth. The other ratchet wheel goes on the opposite direction. Sometimes they're hard to get those pieces seated. You can use the advanced knob to force them down. Checking that's sitting as it should. I think that's good. Okay, so springs and levers and so forth. Right, let's get these in position. There are two springs. This is one of them. This is the other. Now frequently this particular spring has got more of a bend in it around the end there, so but take a close look at how the loop of those springs goes. There's a shoulder screw that holds that one in position. Likewise here. No, just done that wrong. And I've lost the screw. Come on out. There it is. That's my two springs in position. Start getting the levers in position. Right, first we have a plane washer. Then we have a lever. Then we have a washer with a larger hole through the centre. Then we have this lever. And the post that goes through them is this one. I'm just going to rub a little bit of, put a bit of synthetic grease on the centre of that where those pieces will move. Just a wipe, doesn't need anything in particular. Probably wouldn't hurt if it was completely dry. Then we've got to get the screw through the top lever, through the larger washer, through the other lever, through the smaller washer, and screwed into the casting. And as you'd expect, it's not going smoothly. The screw is started. Okay, so now it's got to get these levers arranged so that they're not caught on the shoulder of the screw but revolve around it smoothly. And that lever is just now, that's good. Now it's come down to level. It's passed through this lever, passed through the larger washer, passed through this arm, and it's now on the bearing on the smaller washer at the bottom. If I tighten that up, that's all in place. Now the springs. The spring on this side has to come in. Usually you can lift the arm up and slide it in underneath. Let's see if I'm going to be so lucky. Yep. And that bears on the back of this arm on that pin. So this is sprung loaded. The other one will bear on the shutter release. Now we've got the wheel that goes on here. There's a little cam on this wheel that picks up the film advance mechanism. And of course we want a bit of synthetic grease through the pivot point. That goes on there. And the large screw goes through there. That's the axle for that wheel. Check that that's all moving smoothly. Tighten that up. So that leaves the shutter release to be dropped into place there now. So to achieve that, here's our shutter release. I'm going to take some molybdenum paste, put a wipe through the centre where it runs on the post. At the top, that little hole, I'll put a wipe through there, and that rectangular slot, I'm putting a wipe through there. The spring that we have sticking out of the front of the camera at the moment has to come in behind this post on that lever, so I've got to poke it in underneath there. Of course it'll be quite strongly resisting that, so it's always a little bit interesting. Yeah, it doesn't want to go under that rivet, there's not enough play there. I have to just slacken this screw half a notch just to loosen that up so I can slide that spring in underneath. That's better. And that spring acts to pull this arm forward. Now my shutter release can go down in here. Has to go on the shaft, of course, in the camera. The top part fits over that pin there. That looks promising. Let me get the rest of my film advance together. I've got the advanced rewind lever here. It sits on the camera like that. Take note of the shape of it there as it sits against that lever. This bush goes on there like that, and the shutter release, the film advance knob, goes on the top. Just run that down lightly. Of course I haven't got my spanner on the shaft at the moment, so we're not seeing any action there. This piece, this is all lifting up out of the way because the top of the camera's not holding it, but normally it would sit about there. As the sprocket comes round, I'll shift it out the way. As the sprocket comes round, it drives this wheel, and this wheel's got a little cam on it, and the cam has got a little notch in it. And the notch, this piece, drops into the notch, and it drives this arm backwards, which lifts it out of engagement with the shutter release and allows you to depress the shutter release. Is that sitting on its post still? It is. That all looks like it's there. Now I haven't got my frame counter in place at the moment, but I'll just remove that from the top of the camera, put my top cover in place. Got to get the advanced rewind lever through the slot in the back of this, so sometimes that goes smoothly, other times it just doesn't seem to happen. Not today. Today it's not playing the game. Let's try holding that in from here. It wants to go everywhere but the right place today. This piece is unnaturally and keen to get away. That's better. So I've got my lever in place. Let's wind that film advance up. Now if I roll the sprocket with my thumb from inside the camera, as I move the film advance, eventually it locks the film advance. If I press the shutter release, it frees everything up until you get to the next frame. Except it's not locking for the next frame. Something's not happening. Find out what's happening there. That shutter release component didn't drop back into place, I'd say. this piece was not engaging the wheel, and I don't know why. It may have been held too far forward by the shutter release. I'd say that's the case. Try that again. I may have to bend the arm on this lever out slightly so that it releases earlier. It was staying stuck and trapped in that little rectangular opening and wasn't allowed to come up. If the shutter release had come up far enough, that should have moved. It should have popped like that, allowing the nose of it to contact the wheel. If there's sufficient clearance, that certainly all works. There's resistance there on that shutter release. It's not lifting properly. Let me lift that out. It may be that the nose of this is too much friction on this shaft. I'm going to put a wipe of molybdenum paste on there. Get my shutter release back in place. Certainly that action's stiffer than I would expect it to be. I think it's in that rectangular opening. I think that the friction there is on this little tab is too high. I'll put a wipe of molybdenum paste on there and try that again. I'm looking closely at this pin here to try and see if there's an alignment problem there. In other words, trying to see if that pin's bent out of shape and is pulling everything across. That's certainly possible. As I was saying before the camera stopped, I think this pin, if that pin's slightly off square, if it's slightly bent, that might be pulling things across too far. I'll have to have a look. I feel quite sharp edges here, and I think that's catching that lever. That's contributing to the roughness. So I'm just going to take a very fine file or a bit of fine emery paper and just run over those rough edges, and hopefully that's what's causing me problems, making the action just unusually stiff as it slides down. Because if it's a very sharp edge, it doesn't matter what lubrication you've got there, it's going to bite into the metal that it's supposed to be sliding smoothly over. That appears to have been the case. That rough edge was causing me the problems. I just took a very fine file and just took the sharp edge off that piece round that rectangular hole, and now the shutter release moves smoothly and releases the film advance reliably each time. So that was a bit unusual and a bit unexpected. That sharp edges, I don't really know how to account for that. They may have been there pretty much all the time from manufacture. However, no point worrying about that now. That mechanism does work, so I'm happy about that. Let's lift this off. And I'll apply a bit of synthetic grease around those little ratchet teeth there that pick up the levers that the levers act against. One is the rewind lever, of course, and that acts like, that's the ratchet noise. It means it can only move in one direction. Right, now my top cover. I've cleaned the viewfinder in this, that's all ready to go. And my frame count is the only component left to think about here. I'll put a wipe of synthetic grease through the centre. That has a spring that sits on it, and that sits over that screw head there. Now all I have to do is be able to get the top cover back in place without disturbing anything. I think I can almost achieve that. Everything's in place. We could add 2 screws to the top here. Let's put those in place. Put my advanced knob in place. Find the spanner to hold on the flats on the top of the take-up spool. Do that up tight. Why am I getting no action with my frame counter? Summit ain't right. Oh, I've left something out. That'll be why. That'll explain it. If you haven't got gears driving something, things don't get driven. Right. Unwind the last couple of moves. This is the piece we didn't have. A wipe of molybdenum paste. This binds on the frame counter quite strongly. It needs to have some friction there, but probably not as much as it's currently got. Make sure we've got sufficient of this on here. This is aluminium too, I think. Unless my eyes deceive me and it's nickel plated steel. I think that's aluminium. But whatever it is, it's fairly... Yeah, that just bites on that frame counter. Just bites too strongly for my happiness there. This has just got too strong a bite on it. You need some controlled friction. That's just to allow you to set your frame counter. If that's too stiff, well, you'd never be able to set your frame counter. Let's see if I can stretch that open slightly. If this all goes bad, well, I can probably find another one. That is just so stiff. I wonder if it's actually bent. That's a possibility, that's canted over to one side and that's why it doesn't want to move. I need to find a drill bit the right diameter to slide neatly down in there and check that that actually is, that the hole on it is round, but basically it'll turn on something.